The world was a deafening roar. Then silence. A silence that felt heavier than any cannonade, ringing with the echoes of shattered earth and broken men. I was supposed to be dead, wasn't I? Just another casualty, left behind on that first brutal day at Gettysburg, a forgotten uniform among the fallen. But as the smoke, thick and acrid, slowly began to clear, two stark, undeniable facts hit me harder than the minié ball that had ripped through my side and knocked me from my horse. I was alive, and I was hopelessly, terrifyingly behind enemy lines. In my pocket, wrapped meticulously in oilcloth to protect it from the Pennsylvania summer damp, sat a scrap of paper. It was a flimsy, ink-stained thing, yet it held the potential to either win this agonizing war for the Union or, God forbid, to die with me in this blood-soaked field. My breath hitched. This wasn't just about my life anymore. That scrap of paper, an unfinished, hastily sketched map detailing General Lee's intricate supply lines, might sound like something ripped straight from a Hollywood script, a dramatic flourish designed for the silver screen. But believe me, it was no fluff. It was a tangible thread stitched into the very fabric of the true bloodbath that irrevocably rewrote the American experiment. Over the next 20 minutes, we're not just going to recount a battle. We're going to chase one Union private, a kid, really, let's call him Elias Whitaker, through 48 nightmare hours. From the scorching 1st of July to the climactic 3rd, 1863, we'll be with him. We'll bounce between Elias's desperate, gut-wrenching fight to survive against impossible odds and the sweeping, strategic chess match being played out on the rolling hills and valleys around Gettysburg. Why? Because, frankly, the sheer scale of this battle, with its 160,000 men and 51,000 casualties, is too vast, too abstract, to truly comprehend unless we plant our boots right beside one trembling kid, unless we feel the grit in his teeth, the terror in his heart, and the burning determination in his spirit. This isn't just history. It's his story, and the story of countless others like him. If Elias, against all sense and reason, manages to get that map into General Meade's hands, the Confederacy's back might just be broken. But if he fails, if that vital intelligence perishes with him in some forgotten ditch, this brutal war might drag on for another year, 2 years, until both nations bleed white, exhausted, and hollowed out. Are you ready to march into that chaos? Let's go. The first day, a corpse who wouldn't stay still. Elias wakes under a peach tree west of town, the sweet, cloying smell of overripe fruit mingling sickeningly with the coppery tang of blood. His ribs ache, a dull throb that feels like a mule kick, and his rough-spun uniform is soaked through, not with his own blood, thank God, but with someone else's. He pries his eyes open, and the world is a blurry kaleidoscope of shattered dreams. Around him, the grim tableau of defeat. Union stragglers' bodies, contorted in their final agonies, lay sprawled like discarded puppets. Discarded Enfield rifles, their bayonets glinting malevolently in the morning sun, glitter like spilled pickup sticks across the trampled grass, each glint a silent accusation, a testament to the brutal retreat. He remembers, in fragmented, nightmarish flashes, the chaotic scramble through Gettysburg's cobbled streets, the deafening clang of cannonballs clattering like iron dice against stone, the screams, the desperate, unorganized flight. A cold dread washes over him as the full realization hits. The army, his army, has pulled away south, abandoning the town, abandoning him. He is, in the cruel, mocking slang of the Southern soldiers, a lost Yankee sheep, a lone lamb adrift in a sea of gray wolves. The isolation is a physical weight, pressing down on his chest. But Elias isn't supposed to be here at all, certainly not in this state, certainly not alone. Just this morning, what feels like a lifetime ago. He'd been riding dispatch for General John Buford's cavalry, a vital cog in the Union's reconnaissance. He was sprinting with a satchel of fresh orders, dodging rebel skirmishers, when a sudden, terrifying Confederate volley erupted from the tree line. The air hissed with lead, and then a searing pain. His horse, a sturdy bay named Midnight, screamed, stumbled, and collapsed beneath him, a lifeless heap of muscle and bone. Elias was thrown clear, landing hard. The satchel, ripped from his grip, tore open as it hit the ground, and out, fluttering like a morbid butterfly, came the half-finished map. It wasn't just any map. An engineer, working under intense pressure, had sketched it, a detailed, if incomplete, overview of rebel wagons, supply depots, and crucial fords stretching clear to the Potomac River. It was Lee's lifeline, his umbilical cord to his resources, and if it could be severed, the Army of Northern Virginia would wither. If Elias dies here, now, in this peach orchard, that intelligence dies with him. Lee's army, already deep in Union territory, would continue to pillage and forage unopposed. But if he lives, if he can just get this map to the right hands, maybe, just maybe, the Union artillery can shred those wagons, starve Lee out of Pennsylvania, and turn the tide of this invasion. The weight of that maybe is almost unbearable. So, with fingers that tremble uncontrollably, he stuffs the oilcloth back into his haversack, pulls the worn leather strap tight, and whispers the only prayer he knows, a desperate plea to a God he's not sure is listening. Lord, don't let me bungle this. Meanwhile, the macro picture, a brutal panorama Elias can only sense, is unfolding. Lee's gray tide, surging with the momentum of initial victory, has pushed the Federals relentlessly through the streets of Gettysburg and onto the high ground just south and east of town, Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill. It's a desperate, scrambling defense, but the Union troops, though battered, have managed to anchor themselves. Both armies, exhausted but resolute, are digging in, preparing for a second, even more ferocious round. Elias, his side aching with every step, begins limping east along the Baltimore Pike. He sees Confederate pickets, their campfires already flickering in the encroaching twilight. Hears the nasal twang of North Carolina voices, the low murmur of men settling in for the night. The path ahead is clear. He needs to cross their lines, somehow, reach the Union left flank, and hand off that map before sunrise. No pressure at all, just the fate of the Union resting on his bruised shoulders. Night behind enemy lines, echoes and owls. Night on a battlefield isn't just dark. It's a special kind of haunted. It's a canvas painted with shadows and whispers, where every rustle of leaves sounds like approaching footsteps, every distant cry a harbinger of doom. Wounded men, too weak for full-throated screams, cry out in half-voices, their moans carried on the breeze like mournful spirits. Fireflies blink erratically in the humid air, mimicking the slow, spectral flashes of distant muskets. The air itself is a thick, cloying cocktail. The metallic tang of copper from spilled blood, the earthy dampness of freshly turned soil, and the sickeningly sweet, heavy scent of wet cornmeal, a smell Elias will forever associate with death and dread. Elias crawls, more than walks, past a barn that has been hastily converted into a field hospital. The sounds that spill from its gaping maw are unspeakable. Surgeons, their sleeves rolled up, are sawing through bone, the grating sound punctuated by the agonizing screams of men. The screams ride the wind, raw and piercing, then suddenly drop to gurgles, swallowed by the night. Elias nearly retches, his stomach churning with revulsion and fear. But then, a flash of the oilcloth in his pocket, the weight of the map, jolts him back to his mission. He clenches his jaw, forces down the bile, and keeps moving, one agonizing inch at a time. Every 50 yards or so, he stops. He presses himself against the cool earth, heart hammering against his ribs, straining his ears for any sound that isn't the symphony of the dying. He sketches mental breadcrumbs, a desperate attempt to orient himself in this hostile landscape. A broken fence rail, its splinters sharp and unforgiving. A precarious stack of split-rail logs, dark against the fading sky. The familiar pattern of stars above the Big Dipper. His only constant in a world turned upside down. His mind, even in its terror, is calculating, planning. If captured, he has a desperate, terrifying contingency. He plans to swallow the map. He's already ripped it into quarters, the better to make the gulp easier. A grim testament to his resolve. By midnight, his body screaming with exhaustion and fear. He skirted the Confederate campfires, a shimmering line of hostile warmth in the distance. He's reached the rocky spine south of town, a place he doesn't yet know will become legendary. Little Round Top. He doesn't know its name, or its strategic significance, or that it will decide tomorrow's fight. He only senses its elevation, its rugged, unforgiving terrain, offers a desperate sliver of safety, a vantage point away from the immediate dangers of the valley floor. Halfway up the treacherous slope, a rebel patrol, their voices low and guttural, blocks his path. Elias melts behind a massive boulder, pressing himself into the cold stone, his heart hammering so loud he's certain they'll hear it. A drumbeat of panic in the suffocating silence. The patrol passes, their heavy boots crunching on the loose shale, the sound echoing in his ears long after they've vanished into the darkness. He waits 1 full minute, then 2, each second stretching into an eternity, before daring to breathe, before daring to climb again. At the summit, finally, he sees them. Union signal lights, flickering faintly across the dark valley, a Morse-like message of faint, distant hope, a beacon in the abyss. Dawn of day 2, Little Round Top becomes a forge. Sunrise on July 2nd didn't bring peace. It brought a horrifying clarity. 2 armies, like rival gunfighters in a dusty, high-stakes standoff, stared across the valley. The air crackled with a palpable tension, thick and heavy, pregnant with the promise of unimaginable violence. Lee, ever the aggressor, wanted the Union's left flank, a strategic high ground that would allow him to roll up Meade's entire line. Meade, grim-faced and resolute, wanted to keep it. This wasn't just a battle for ground. It was a battle for the soul of the Union, fought on a few critical acres. Enter Colonel Strong Vincent's brigade, hustled to Little Round Top at what seemed like the absolute last possible breath. They were literally running, scrambling up the rocky slopes, their faces grim, their lungs burning. Elias, still hiding among the rocks, a ghost among the living, saw his chance. He flagged down a Union lieutenant, a young man with a face smudged with powder and exhaustion, and blurted out his story, the words tumbling over each other in a desperate rush. The officer, preoccupied with the frantic task of stacking cartridge boxes, preparing for the inevitable onslaught, barely spared him a glance. "Find General Warren," he barked, waving Elias off dismissively. "He's the chief engineer. He'll know what to do with maps. General Gouverneur K. Warren." Meanwhile, was already sprinting toward the crest of Little Round Top, his keen engineer's eye immediately grasping the hill's naked vulnerability. "This hill is naked," he shouted, his voice hoarse with urgency, realizing that a critical piece of high ground, essential to the Union's defense, was undefended. Thus began one of the most famous, most desperate races in Civil War lore. Vincent's 16th Michigan, 44th New York, and 83rd Pennsylvania regiments, their hearts pounding in their chests, scrambled uphill, their boots skidding on loose rocks, arriving mere seconds before Hood's Texans. A relentless gray wave surged up the opposite slope. Elias, driven by an instinct he didn't understand, scrambled too. He found himself, almost by accident, embedded with the 20th Maine, commanded by Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. The fighting was immediate, brutal, and terrifyingly intimate. Bullets hissed like angry hornets, stitching through the air, kicking up dust and splinters from the rocks. The roar of musketry was deafening, a continuous hellish cacophony. Elias, seeing a fallen soldier's Springfield rifle lying uselessly, snatched it up. He reloaded, his hands surprisingly steady despite the tremor in his gut, and fired downhill, aiming into the swirling smoke and chaos, until the rifle's wooden stock splintered violently in his hands. Rendered useless, when their ammunition finally ran dry, the Mainers, their faces grim with desperate resolve, fixed bayonets. It was a last resort, a desperate suicidal gamble. Elias, his heart pounding, out of habit, reached for his haversack, and felt the reassuring, if terrifying, presence of the oilcloth. The map was still there, intact. Just then, the Confederate wave, exhausted, decimated, and facing an unyielding wall of Union steel, faltered. Then, miraculously, it broke. In 10 brutal, bloody minutes, a lifetime etched in fire and fear, the Union left flank was soldered shut. Elias, battered and deafened, learned a profound lesson in that moment. Geography is destiny. A rocky patch of ground, no wider than a wheat field held by desperate men, had just saved the United States. Afternoon, lull, a breath before cannon's roar. After the hill was secured, after the last desperate rebel charge had been repelled, a strange, uneasy quiet descended. It wasn't peace, not by a long shot, but a temporary cessation of the immediate screaming violence. Medics, their faces grim and weary, began the grim task of carting the mangled towards the field hospitals, their stretchers laden with the broken bodies of both friend and foe. Elias, his ears ringing with a dull roar, his face caked with dust and powder, looking like a ghost himself, finally located General Warren. The engineer, still flushed with the adrenaline of the narrow victory, was directing the placement of new defensive positions, his voice hoarse but clear. Elias, his own voice raspy, managed to get Warren's attention. With trembling hands, he unrolled the oilcloth fragments, laying them out on a relatively flat rock. Warren's eyes, sharp and intelligent, widened. This wasn't just a sketch. It was a treasure map of the Confederacy's jugular. Quartermasters' wagons, laden with precious food and ammunition, fords critical for river crossings, even the routes of vital cattle herds, all meticulously sketched in pencil. It was intelligence that could cripple Lee. The engineer whistled low, a sound of profound appreciation and astonishment, then clapped Elias on the shoulder, a gesture of rough, genuine respect. "Good work, son," he muttered, his eyes already calculating, strategizing. Then, without another word, he galloped away, the map clutched in his hand, a new urgency in his movements. Elias expected to follow, to be part of the next crucial step. But before he could even take a step, a gruff surgeon, his hands stained with blood, grabbed him firmly by the arm. "You're bleeding from the ear, son," he said, his voice brooking no argument. "Sit," Elias protested, but the surgeon's gaze was firm. "You've done your part. Now, you sit." While rough bandages were wrapped around his scalp, the world still a muffled roar, he watched, helpless and frustrated. As Confederate guns began to mass along Seminary Ridge, their black muzzles glinting ominously in the afternoon sun, like a row of predatory teeth. Somewhere in that menacing line, General James Longstreet, Lee's trusted lieutenant, was plotting the biggest artillery barrage North America would ever see. Elias's map, his precious, vital intelligence, was now Meade's ace, a potential game-changer. Yet, the kid himself was sidelined, a pawn swapped for a rook, watching the terrifying storm gather from the relative safety of the rear. His mission accomplished, but his body unwilling to obey. Day 3. The Long Grumble and Pickett's Charge. At precisely 1 o'clock on the afternoon of July 3rd, the world ended. Or at least it felt that way. 170 Confederate cannons, arrayed along Seminary Ridge, opened fire simultaneously. The ground didn't just shake. It bucked and roared like a living beast, a seismic tremor that rattled the very bones of the earth. Men screamed, not from wounds, but from the sheer concussive force of the air itself, as invisible waves of pressure burst eardrums and stole breath. Elias, kept strictly rear area by order of the surgeon, felt each monstrous thud deep in his sternum, a physical blow that echoed the terror in his soul. For 2 agonizing hours, solid shot and screaming shell tore through the sky, kicking up geysers of dirt and splintered rock on Cemetery Ridge, the Union's fortified center. It was an inferno, a man-made hell. Union guns, initially replying with their own furious barrage, then deliberately slackened their fire. It was a calculated, terrifying gamble, a strategic feint designed to lure the rebels closer, to make them believe they had silenced the Federal artillery. The tension became unbearable, a suffocating weight in the air. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the cannons ceased. An eerie, ringing silence descended, broken only by the distant cries of the wounded and the nervous rustle of leaves. Then, across a mile-wide field, a sight that defied belief. 12,500 men, soldiers of the Confederacy, stepped out from the tree line in perfect parade order. It was a spectacle of chilling, terrible beauty. Elias, unable to resist the pull of the unfolding drama, climbed onto a supply wagon for a better view, a vantage point that offered a panoramic, horrifying vista. He almost wished he hadn't. Pickett's division, with Pettigrew's and Trimble's brigades arrayed behind them, formed a gray carpet that stretched from horizon to horizon. He'd never seen so many human beings moving with such chilling precision, a wave of humanity advancing toward certain death. It was beautiful in its terrible discipline and utterly, obscenely wrong in its purpose. The Union artillery, silent until this moment, waited. They waited until the rebels reached the Emmitsburg Road rail fence, a critical demarcation point, then unleashed hell. Canister. Giant shotgun blasts of iron, thousands of musket balls packed into each cannon shell. The effect was devastating, unimaginable. Whole companies, entire lines of men, simply vanished into a red mist of flesh and blood and dust. Still, impossibly, the Confederates came, their ranks folding like paper dolls under the relentless fire, yet reforming, pushing onward. Elias, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, spotted Armistead's brigade spearheading the center, driving directly toward the angle, a shallow traverse near a crucial stone wall. A horrifying realization slammed into him. The map. His map had shown this exact weakness, this potential breach point. If the rebels breached that wall, they'd split the Union line like a log, and the entire Federal defense would unravel. Heart in his throat, a primal scream caught in his chest, Elias leaped from the wagon. He sprinted along the reverse slope of the ridge, dodging terrified men and falling debris, his only thought to get to that wall. He volunteered as a stretcher-bearer, a desperate, transparent excuse to reach the front, to be where he might make a difference, however small. Mud sucked at his boots with each agonizing step. The air reeked of sulfur, gunpowder, and the sickening, sweet smell of a butcher shop. When he finally topped the ridge, the world shrank. It narrowed to a 100-yard scrap of stone and splinters, a maelstrom of screaming men, tearing lead, and desperate hand-to-hand combat. Union troops crouched behind the wall, their faces grim, rifles leveled, firing into the surging gray mass. Elias dropped beside a Pennsylvania sergeant, snatched a borrowed rifle through a gap in the wall, and fired. The recoil slammed him backward, knocking him flat, but the line held. Minutes later, General Armistead, the heroic Confederate leading the charge, fell, his colors dropping beside him. The gray tide, finally broken, rolled backward, leaving 7,000 men heaped like broken toys before the wall the Union center had held. Lee's audacious invasion, his last great gamble, died on that wall. Twilight and the map's aftermath. Dusk found Elias slumped against that very same wall, the stone still warm from the day's inferno, slick with mud, and something else he didn't want to think about. His hands were blistered raw from reloading, his throat raw from powder smoke and the screams that had torn through him. The battlefield, once a cacophony of hell, had settled into a low, mournful hum of wounded cries and distant cannon fire. A courier, his horse lathered with foam, galloped up, waving a paper aloft. General Meade's congratulatory order, mixed with a palpable frustration that the army was too bloodied, too exhausted to pursue the retreating Confederates. The strategic opportunity, the chance to utterly destroy Lee, was lost. Elias patted his haversack. It was empty now, a hollow space where the oilcloth map had once been. Mission done. Delivered. Yet, victory tasted like iron and ash in his mouth, a bitter, metallic tang. He began to count, silently, the friends he had lost. The jovial 20th Maine color-bearer, who had joked about Maine blueberries just yesterday, was gone. The gruff surgeon who had rapped his ear, his face etched with exhaustion, was probably still in that barn, surrounded by unspeakable horrors. Even the lieutenant who had first dismissed him, too busy to care about a scrap of paper, was likely among the thousands of silent figures now littering the field. All gone, somewhere across the valley, under the shroud of night. Lee, his heart heavy, would tell a grieving picket, "It's all my fault." The kid from Vermont, Elias Whitaker, realized with a chilling clarity that wars were not, in fact, chess. They weren't about clever moves and strategic sacrifices on a neat board. They were demolition. They were about tearing things down, about shattering lives and landscapes. And even the winners, those who stood victorious on the blood-soaked ground, left with rubble in their hearts, fragments of their souls scattered among the dead. If you're gripping the edge of your seat right now, feeling that chill of history, you are absolutely not alone. This channel, this community, is dedicated to diving deep into the human hinge points of history. Those electrifying, terrifying, pivotal moments when one trembling, ordinary soul, like Elias, tilts the entire planet on its axis. We explore the choices, the courage, and the sheer, raw humanity that shaped our world. So don't just watch. Become part of this journey. Smash that subscribe button with the force of a Union bayonet charge, so you never, ever miss our next walk through the inferno of the past. And hey, tap that bell icon too, because, let's be honest, YouTube sometimes forgets you actually like learning stuff that makes your jaw drop. The 4th of July. Rain, retreat, and reckoning. July 4th dawned not with celebratory fireworks, but with a mournful, relentless rain. It fell in sheets, as if heaven itself wanted to scrub the blood from the fields to wash away the sins of man. But the rain only turned the churned earth into a thick, clinging mud, making the landscape even more desolate. Lee's wagons, a long, creaking procession of defeat, began their slow, agonizing retreat toward the Potomac River, their heavy wheels sinking into the sodden ground. The river, swollen and ferocious from the downpour, trapped him, a natural barrier that could have been his undoing. Yet Meade, cautious to a fault, remained hesitant, reorganizing his battered corps, wary of another costly engagement. Elias, his ear still ringing, his body aching, found himself promoted impromptu to orderly. His new role was a grim parade of responsibility, ferrying messages between generals who, even in victory's aftermath, bickered like schoolmasters over strategy and glory. He witnessed firsthand the agonizing moment Meade decided against a full-scale assault on Lee's trapped army. The frustration was palpable, a heavy cloud hanging over the Union command. Some historians, peering back through the mists of time, still argue that the war might have ended right there, on the banks of the Potomac, had the Union attacked. Instead, both armies, exhausted and bleeding, licked their wounds, glaring across the swollen, indifferent water, knowing the fight, though paused, was far from over. Elias felt a bewildering mix of emotions. A profound relief that he would live, that the immediate threat to his life had passed. But beneath that relief simmered a hollow rage. Rage that more wouldn't, that the war would continue, that more lives would be needlessly thrown into the maw of conflict. On the long, somber march north, away from the ravaged fields of Gettysburg, he helped bury the bloated dead in shallow, muddy graves. Each shovelful of earth, heavy and cold, was a stark reminder that history books, with their clean narratives of strategy and heroism, rarely tallied the stench, the flies, the anonymity of the fallen. They rarely captured the true, visceral horror of what had transpired. Gettysburg Address, a cemetery, a speech, a reboot. 4 months later, the crisp air of November replaced the humid heat of July. President Abraham Lincoln, his face etched with the weight of a nation at war, stood where Elias had once crouched behind stone, firing a borrowed rifle. The battlefield, once a chaotic maelstrom of death, was now consecrated ground, a national cemetery. Rows of fresh mounds, each a silent testament to unimaginable sacrifice, stretched like corduroy across the rolling landscape. Elias, discharged from service, his body bearing the permanent marks of his ordeal, a crutch to steady his gait, a jagged scar tracing a line across his temple, returned. He found a spot 50 yards from the platform, far enough to be anonymous, close enough to hear. He listened as Lincoln delivered his now famous 2-minute speech, words that would echo through the ages. Government of the people, by the people, for the people. Elias, a simple farm boy turned reluctant soldier, didn't grasp the full poetic grandeur at first. But as Lincoln spoke, his voice resonating with quiet power, Elias realized something profound. The war's meaning had shifted, subtly but irrevocably, under everyone's boots. No longer was it just about preserving the Union, about holding a fragile nation together. Now, it was a struggle for something more profound, something Lincoln called a new birth of freedom. He fingered the empty oilcloth in his pocket, a phantom weight, a habit he couldn't break. He felt the ghosts of those 48 hours, the terror, the desperation, the raw courage. And in that moment, he understood. His map, vital as it had been, mattered less in the grand scheme of things than the men who had held the hill, the men who had defended that wall with their lives. Their sacrifice, their unwavering resolve, had truly turned the tide. Yet, the paradox was not lost on him. Without the map, perhaps the hill would have fallen. Perhaps the wall would have cracked. In the intricate, terrifying dance of history, everything hinges on everything else. A vast, interconnected spiderweb trembling at the heartbeat of one boy. One desperate act of courage. So, what's the verdict on Gettysburg? It bled 51,000 men in 3 days, more than any fight on the North American continent before or since. It wasn't just a battle. It was an amputation, a horrific severing of lives. It turned Lee's last desperate strategic gambit to break the Union's will into a slow, agonizing, bleeding retreat. It convinced skeptical European powers, poised to recognize the Confederacy, to stay out of the conflict, sealing the South's diplomatic fate. And perhaps most significantly, it handed Abraham Lincoln the rhetorical key. the moral compass, to reforge the war's purpose, transforming it from a fight for union into a crusade for freedom. And somewhere inside that swirling cyclone of lead and fire stood one private, a kid, half deaf from the cannonades, his body bruised, his mind scarred, carrying a hand-drawn map that held the fate of an army. He survived 48 hours behind enemy lines, a testament to sheer grit and desperate luck. Elias's personal war ended there, on that blood-soaked ground. America's war, tragically, rolled on. But the hinge had creaked shut. The decisive moment, the turning point, had passed. Next time you hear those iconic words, 77 years ago, don't just picture a revered president. Picture the kid. Picture Elias Whitaker, hiding among the rocks, passing wet scraps of paper uphill, his heart hammering, his breath ragged. Because history isn't just about marble statues and grand pronouncements. It's terror. It's luck. It's the stubborn lungs of ordinary men refusing to quit. If you want to walk those hills yourself, to feel the echoes of their sacrifice, you'll find links below for park info and further reading. Leave a comment. Do you think Meade should have chased Lee? Or was the Union truly too mangled to move? And hey, do me a favor. Share this with that friend who claims history is boring. Odds are they've never heard Elias's story. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your curiosity ready.